Okay, guys, so today we are going to talk about read aloud task. This is the first task in the PTE course, and I'm going to show you these strategies and tips you have to remember just to be able to read naturally and absolutely to be natural in reading. Okay, now this is a long answer speaking task type that tests reading and speaking skills. You have to read aloud a short text with correct pronunciation and with correct intonation. I'm going to show you how to use the correct punctuation marks and how to use correct intonation while discussing these strategies and tips in the PTE exam or in the reading aloud task. So you will do 6 to 7 read aloud tasks. This is the exact screen that is going to be shown. And the screen, you notice here that we have the instructions. The instructions are saying that I have 35 35 seconds to skim the passage, to check the passage, and I have 35 to 40 seconds to read the passage aloud. Now, this box is about recording status box that tells you when the microphone opens and when the microphone closes. And here, guys, is the passage that you have to read aloud. Now, let me show you these strategies again that you have to remember just to read naturally. Now, read the text through first. Use the 30 to 40 seconds before the microphone opens to skim the text. When I say skim, guys, you have to read fast. And you have to check the meaning of the passage. Absolutely every text has a meaning. So please be careful because I have to skim the passage, I have to check the passage, and I have to understand the topic of the passage and even the passage itself. Now, the next strategy, I have to use the correct punctuation marks and absolutely and the grammar to identify where pauses will be needed between meaning groups. Keep in mind, guys, that punctuation marks is really important because if you have a comma, you have to pause for 1 second. If you have a full stop, you have to pause for 2 seconds. So be careful. The next strategy, identify any words that may be less familiar to you and think how they might be pronounced. The final strategy is read the first part aloud before the microphone opens. This will help you to begin speaking when you hear the tone. So, absolutely, I have to do so just to be ready to read the passage correctly. Now, while reading, begin reading as soon as the tone, sounds, and the recording status changes to a blue bar. As you read, stress the words that carry important information. Use pausing to group the text into meaningful chunks. Absolutely, I have to do so with using correct punctuation marks. Absolutely, guys, intonation is really important. I have to use the rising intonation and the falling intonation. Now use rising intonation to show a contrast and falling intonation to show that you have finished a point or a complete sentence or come to the end of what you are saying. Don't forget, guys, that time is really important. So I have to be careful about the time. First of all, guys, let me tell you that take your time. You have plenty of time, so don't rush the things up. So please, you have to be careful. You have to slow down. You don't have to read really fast, and you have to use a normal volume. So you have plenty of time. So don't rush the things up, as we said. Read with meaning at a normal volume. Don't leave out any words because if you want to do so, the meaning of the passage will not be complete. If you make a mistake, correct it immediately and complete or continue. Do not stop reading and don't begin again at the beginning. Click next when you are ready to go on to the next task. Now, you have to prepare yourself. And absolutely, if you want to prepare yourself, you have to practice reading sentences out loud, grouping the words into meaningful chunks. Practice putting short pauses at commas and between meaningful groups, and longer pauses at full stops. As we said, guys, I have to pause for 1 second if there is a comma, and I have to pause for 2 seconds if I have a full stop. Select 6 or maybe 7 short texts of 2 or 3 sentences, up to 60 words, from a magazine or online. Look at the punctuation and the grammar and mark the chunks with a slash. Time yourself, because absolutely you have to stick with the time. So time yourself reading each one. After 40 seconds, go on to the next text. So you have to practice the way that you have to divide yourself and divide the time just to fully read the passage in the specific time. Listen to the way the final sound in one word links to the first sound in the next when people speak. Try to do this when you read aloud. You will score higher if your fluency shows a natural rhythm, which is given by chunking and stress. Read a sentence and clap your hands on each stress word. Be aware of the weak forms between stress words. Keep in mind, guys, that all auxiliaries in English are weak forms. For example, if you want to say he was reading, you don't have to say he was reading, but you have to say he was reading. So keep in mind that all auxiliaries, was is an auxiliary, it is a weak form, and reading is the main verb, it is a strong form. Another example, instead of saying we were reading, you have to say we were reading. So again, all auxiliaries are weak forms and all the main verbs are strong forms. When practicing reading aloud, read on smoothly even if you make a mistake, as hesitations, false starts, and repetitions can lower your score. So please be careful about repetitions. Don't repeat yourself over and over again, and even the pronunciation of wrong words. Practice using rising intonation in lists and falling intonation at the end of the sentences. When you learn a new word, use a dictionary that has the words recorded so you can check both the pronunciation of that word, of the sounds, and where the word stress falls. You will read more fluently if you understand what you are reading. So work on your reading and vocabulary skills as well as your speaking skills. So this is it. This is about strategies. Now let me show you the tips that you don't have to forget. First of all, I have to tell you that in this task, there are 6 to 7 tasks. For each task, you read the text aloud into the microphone. The wording in the instructions below is the same, is exactly the same as you will see in the actual test. Okay, so notice here, guys, I have to look at the text below in 40 seconds. You must read this text aloud as naturally and as clearly as you can. And absolutely, you have 40 seconds to read the passage aloud. So let me show you the tips and let me apply these tips while reading the passages just to be able to remember them all the time while reading. Now, tip number 1, break the text up into chunks. So please, because it will make it really easy for you while reading. and pause slightly between each one as you read. This is about full stops, commas, punctuation marks, exclamation marks, parentheses, colons, semicolons. Before recording begins, use the punctuation marks, please, to help you decide where to pause and where each new chunk will begin. Now let's check or let's apply this in the first passage. First of all, guys, notice that here we have a full stop, here we have a comma, here we have a comma, here we have a full stop. So let me divide the passage into chunks. This is chunk number 1. This is chunk number 2. This is chunk number 3. This is chunk number 4, which is the final one. So I have to pause just to be able to read naturally. Let me read this passage and let me show you how I have to chunk the passage, or I have to divide the passage into chunks, and the way that I have to use the correct punctuation marks. Okay, now, market research is a vital part of the planning of any business. However, you or your staff may be in a particular field. If you are thinking of introducing a service of a new area, it is important to find out what the local population thinks about it first. So this is it. Now let me read tip number 2 and let me apply this tip with the second passage. Tip number 2 is saying, as you read, stress the words that carry important information. This makes it easier to understand what are you saying or what you are saying. Okay. Now let me read passage number 2 and let me show you the stress that I have to apply. Not a lot is known about how this transportation of goods by water first began. Large cargo boats were being used in some parts of the world up to 5,000 years ago. However, sea trade became more widespread when large sailing boats traveled between ports, carrying spices, perfumes, and objects made by land. Now let me show you tip number 3, which is saying, tip number 3 says, use rising intonation patterns to show a contrast. For example, notice here, guys, we have buildings in passage number 3. This is buildings. And here we have trees. This is trees. So now I have to use rising intonation patterns to show contrast. Let me read passage number 3 and let me show you how I have to use the rising intonation just to show a contrast. Now, when the young artist was asked about his drawing, he explained that he had started by taking a photograph of himself sitting by a window at home. He then drew his face from the photograph and replaced the buildings, which were outside the window with the trees. This gave the picture a softer, more artistic background. Now let me read tip number 4. And absolutely, I have to apply that with the text number 4. 4 is saying, try to get the word distress right on multiple syllable words. In text number 4, this is it. There are words that end in ION. Usually the stress falls on the syllable before the ION. So if I want to say this word, I have to say pollution. And if I want to say this word, I have to say combustion. Finally, stations. So notice that we have TION, TION, TION. So the stress is all the time before TION. Okay? So let me read paragraph number 4 and let me apply this step. Humans need to use energy in order to exist. So it is unsurprising that the way people have been producing energy is largely responsible for current environmental problems. Pollution comes in many forms, but those that are most concerning because of their impact on health result from the combustion of fuels in power stations and cars. Now let me read tip number 5, and absolutely I have to apply that with passage number 5. Tip number 5 is saying look for sensor groups as well as the grammatical structure to notice which groups of words should be raised or should be said, sorry, in one chunk. Let's take a look at this example in passage number 4. We have to provide, this is it, individuals with an income once they stop working. So we have once they stop working. So this is the first group, and this is the second group. So I have to pause. Now let me show you guys how I have to divide the text into groups as well as the grammatical structure just to read naturally. Now clearly times are changing, and while many people are saving for their retirement, many more still need to do so. Most countries have a range of pension schemes that are designed to provide individuals with an income once they stopped working. People need to take advantage of these if they are to have sufficient money throughout their retirement years. Now, let me show you the final tip, which is number 6. Tip number 6 is saying use falling intonation patterns to show that you have finished a point or come to the end of what you are saying. I need you to notice this example, which is on our moods. This is it. And notice that it is at the end of the first sentence. And finally, we have our trees. And this is the end of the second sentence. So my intonation should be down, and I have to use falling intonation because the number 1, it is at the end of the first sentence. And here, the falling intonation because I have to end what I'm saying. So let me read by saying, according to recent research, sunshine and warm weather have a positive effect on our moods. The British Journal of Psychology has published a report in which it claims that anxiety levels fall when temperatures rise, while increased exposure to sunshine makes us think more positively about our lives. So please be careful, and you have to apply these steps and strategies just to read correctly and just to be natural in not only in reading but absolutely in speaking. Thank you so much.